welcome to episode 18 of the Evolving Media podcast, a podcast where we talk about where the world of media is heading and how we as creatives, producers and all-around professionals in this world can learn, adapt and improve our craft in order to thrive in the blindingly exciting, but at the same time pretty scary future. My guest today is Houston Howard, professor in transmedia at LA Film School, lawyer, founder of 13 Creative, and author of the book You're Gonna Need a Bigger Story, the 21st Century Survival Guide to not just telling stories, but building super stories. It's a pretty long title, but a pretty good book. Join us for a talk about why we should adapt transmedia storytelling into our daily creative life, how we can look at revenue possibilities as yet another tool in our creative toolbox, and what empathetic pitching really looks like. And of course, much more. It'll be an interesting ride, I can guarantee that, so welcome. So Houston, welcome to this podcast. I'm very, very happy to have you on board.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I've seen some of the interviews that you've done for Film Courage over on YouTube, and I encourage every viewer to go and have a look at or every listener to go and have a look at those as well. Extremely informative. And I mean, one thing I take from those things that you talk about there is how creators nowadays have so much more power, or at least the possibility to have so much more power when it comes to outreach, but also when it comes to your own position in the whole media industry. Do you feel that this changes what kind of people that will eventually succeed?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I mean, if you look at just the past 10 years, I think that we've been experiencing this amazing transition in the entertainment industry and the media industry. It's a real seminal time that has been, I think, very favorable to creators in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at the transition between, historically, anytime there's a transition from print to radio, from radio into TV, from TV into mobile and digital. Anytime you have these transitions, there's always disruption. There's always sort of this almost a panic with a traditional guard that doesn't know what to do. But at the same time, there are people within that transition who aren't panicking, that see this as an opportunity and leverage that opportunity. And that's why you get changeover during these transition times. I think the 5-year, 10-year window that we're living in right now is one of these historic transition times that presents a lot of trepidation and a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, because we're seeing a lot of industry turnover. We see majors switching out. We're seeing crazy things like, Disney buying Fox and AT&T buying Warner Brothers and Amazon buying Whole Foods and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm here in Hollywood, and everywhere you go, everyone is scared and nervous, and they say things like Rome is burning and we don't know what to do. And which in a lot of respects, that's true. But at the same time, while there's all these people running around thinking that Rome is burning, there is now the opportunity for creators to jump in during this disruption and find a new path, because what we've seen is in this 5 to 10 year window, there's been such a democratization of technology. I mean, that 20 years ago, nobody had the tools to even create all the stuff that we can create. The entire entertainment industry was bottlenecked to these choke points of, 3 to 15 old white guys in Hollywood that made all the decisions for all media, for everything. And now, because you can go straight to the market through distribution channels, through the internet, you can cultivate your own audience. You can cultivate your own eyeballs. You can create as much as you can create, as much as you have the hours in the day to create. You can do these things, and never before in human history were you able to do this. So the biggest failing I see of creators today is when they've been in the industry, they've been either in just traditional Hollywood or sort of any sort of media industry worldwide, is that they're used to creating in the old way, and just, I'm not talking about craft, just the thinking, the way they approach the old model. This is what they're comfortable with, and they're still doing that in today's market. And so they're using a 1995 mentality or a 2012 mentality or a 2005 mentality as they create for today's market. And the fact of the matter is, they have a lot more tools at their disposal and a lot more opportunity at their disposal than they even understand. And if they understood how to use those tools and leverage that in the right way, there's massive opportunities. Super, super exciting to be alive and in the industry right now at this time.
At the same time, I'm feeling that you say that people are running around scared and screaming that Rome is burning, which I see a lot as well, especially in traditional broadcasters, public service broadcasters, etc., and so forth over here in Europe. And I mean, it is scary because it's in this kind of future world, or the world we live in right now. It's on you to a certain extent, or to quite a large extent. It's on you to be able to identify what to do and how to do it. But I guess what's needed then is a certain kind of mentality, that you need to be knowledgeable enough to know what you don't know and what you do know. And you have to be humble enough to be able to take on board collaborators that can fill in the gaps that you can't fill in yourself. So you need to be like a jack of all trades, but at the same time, very open to collaborating across borders.
Absolutely, and this is something I get a lot when I talk to people. I do a lot of speaking and keynoting around town. Do a lot of workshops, things like that for professionals. And what they tell me is they're like, this just seems like a lot of work. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I tell them, I said, this is. There's this amazing website that if you go to it, you can learn anything about anything, and it's google.com. Go there and type in, how do I create a podcast? And you can spend the 5 to 7 to 17 to 22 hours reading about how to make a podcast, and all of a sudden you can make a podcast. Or you're knowledgeable enough to then open yourself up to figuring out who to collaborate with, so you can have a good conversation with a collaborator about what you need to do and what the opportunity is. And it's this really interesting thing when they hear that. They're like, yeah, but that's either 22 hours, 17 hours to learn how to do a podcast. I don't know. And what I always tell them is, especially independent creators, is when you're creating a movie or any sort of project, when you're launching a podcast, whatever you're doing, you're launching a brand. And, especially when you're talking about filmmaking, which I deal with the most, you're launching a business. There's a product. You're going to get financing for that product. Hopefully, once that financing is in place, you're going to staff that that business with staff. And you need to have the mentality that an entrepreneur has when they're launching a consumer brand. I'm 100% convinced that if entertainment producers and creators had the mentality of an entrepreneur when they launch consumer brands, they would create their entertainment differently. Because if you put your, for example, I know people right now. I know a lady who's launching a spa. So it's a small business. She's creating a spa. She just opened and just launched. I think last week was her opening day. Right. So it's small business right here in Los Angeles, and the amount of work she has to put in for the small business. She's the boss. Every day she's up at 5. She's going to bed at 2. She is hustling throughout the day, putting out fires, dealing with everything. I know people that launched a coffee shop and opened a coffee shop. The amount of work you have to do to launch your own business is incredible, right? And whether you're starting a pizza shop or a hair salon, whatever it is, the mentality of a small business owner when they launch consumer brands is, I got to do what I have to do. I have to learn how to do jobs I never didn't know how to do before. And there's this hustle that comes along with entrepreneurism that is needed to be able to launch a business. For some reason, screenwriters or authors or podcasters or entertainers in general, they think all they have to do is write 5 pages a day and get their word count in a day or whatever it is. And as long as they create their own product, then they're going to be good. But that's just like saying that the guy that's opening the pizza shop, all he has to worry about is making a good pizza, and then everything else will magically drop into place. And it's not the real world. Mm-hmm. And so today, I think the opportunities are there to be able to create and grow your brand differently and more effectively and engage audiences in a new way. But what it takes is an entrepreneurial mindset to say, I'm going to have to hustle. I have to learn. I have to grind. I have to now figure out how to collaborate in a new way, because this is a new world. And maybe in 1997, you can just do your 5 pages a day as a screenwriter, but this isn't 1997 anymore. It's a whole different world. And so I think there's a really interesting dividing line. The people that get that mindset and get that entrepreneurial spirit and that entrepreneurial hustle, I think tremendous, tremendous upside. But what we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of people that maybe are talented at their craft. When they don't have that mindset, they're going to fall off. So this is what we're seeing in the transition. There's always a falling away of an old guard, and then the emergence of a new guard. I think that new guard are creators, are artists and creators that have this really interesting entrepreneurial spirit, where they're willing to learn and collaborate with these new platforms in mind.
It feels like it's like the old sports saying that hard work beats talent all the time if talent doesn't do hard work. It's sort of like it goes along the same way somehow.
Absolutely. I mean, that the romantic side of artists and people in entertainment is that the best product will always win. The best talent will always win. As long as I'm better than everybody, I'll be successful. And what we see in business, and just not even just in entertainment, in all of business, is it's not always the best product that wins. And it's, I had an investor that told me that you bet on the horse and you bet on the jockey. That's how he put it. He said, a lot of times you can have a great looking horse, but if the jockey's not there, and if you don't trust that jockey, then all of a sudden it's going to be a bad bet. So you bet on the horse, you bet on the jockey. And so you can have you can have great talent, you can have a great product, but if you don't put the other pieces in play, then it's not going to work. And so I think what we see is talent is just one component, that you have to have other things in place, other mechanisms, other mindsets, other things in place, other pieces of the puzzle that you have to put together to really, move things forward, especially in today's market, just because it's different.
I can understand that people who have a proposition, an idea for a book or a film or whatever, that it might be a case also of not perhaps being able to identify the full potential or identify what else could be done and whom to collaborate with. I mean, it can be difficult enough to just think of the storyline for a film or a book or a series, never mind building the full IP, so to speak. But say that I have what I feel is a great idea, and my mom has told me that it's a great idea for a book or a documentary film. Yeah. How would you kick off the process of trying to making it into a viable proposition in today's world? I mean, I realize one thing is that it's going to be a long struggle. You have to that's what you have to prepare for. But how would you set out?
So the way I always do it, and the way that I help other people do it, and the way I collaborate with other people, is the very first thing that you do is you have to understand the emotional premise, the emotional foundation, or the thematic foundation of your story, of your project. And once you understand that thematic foundation, something that I call a soapbox. What are you trying to say? Yeah. Where did it come from? What's the thing in your heart that you pulled out and you're putting on screen, on paper, whatever it is? That is going to be an essential palette to use to build the brand, because all of a sudden, with every sort of extension that you're going to create, every brand component you're going to create, you're going to make sure that emotional resonance is consistent, and that will then create a brand coherence. And one thing that I've seen is when I talk to people, they're like, Houston, I get all this, I get what you're saying, but I'm struggling figuring out how to do it for myself. Yeah. And I have this project. And I see it when you talk about all these other case studies, but I just can't see it in mine. 9 times out of 10, if I just sit with them and I help them figure out what exactly they're trying to say with their piece, what they're trying to say with their art, what is that emotional foundation, what is that soapbox, as soon as I unlock that and when they realize that and recognize that, they say, oh, wow. Okay, great. I get it. So then I can do this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And then that just gets you're pushing the boulder over the hill and then it's tumbling down the side. That really gets things going. So that creates this brand coherence that I think is really, really super effective. Make sure that everything's going to be emotionally similar throughout the entire project. And that usually gets them going quickly, creatively beyond that. So then I think once you have that, the next thing that I'm a big advocate of is really identifying and optimizing the story world of your project. Not necessarily meaning that everything has to be sword and sandal fantasy or epic sci-fi, but you can have whether you're a documentary, whether you're a podcast, whether you're a feature film, whatever genre you're in. Identifying the story world, I think, is the key to story potential. You can find ways to extend a story based off individual characters, but until you understand your story potential, you'll never really understand if you don't understand your storyboard, you're not going to understand your story potential. And if you don't understand your story potential, you're not going to understand your revenue potential or any of the other ways to, extend and broaden the brand. And so, I was just dealing with a documentarian about this recently. And, he approached me about his documentary, and he said, Houston, I get how this works with Star Wars and I get how this works with Marvel, but I'm doing a documentary. How does this work? And I said, you have to figure out your story world. He was doing a documentary. It's an interesting idea. He was doing a documentary about a kid who was trying to get out of inner city Chicago, a ghetto in the inner city of Chicago. And the way what he was doing to get out of the inner city Chicago is the kid was producing a documentary about his ghetto. And this documentary was about the kid producing a documentary, and which was a really interesting piece. And so, we talked about a few easy ways to be able to extend that story, but really, when I sat down with him and we figured out the soapbox and the emotional connectivity of it, we turned our attention to the story world, and we identified this particular government housing situation as the story world. And this kid who was creating a documentary was just one really interesting character trying to make it out of that government housing unit. And so then he was able to identify another character, real person. I call them characters, but the real people, which was it was a 100-year-old Navy vet who was there. That there was this old lady who swore like a sailor. All these interesting people that had really similar journeys of trying to get out of this place. And so all of a sudden, once he realized the story world was the entire housing unit and the kid shooting the documentary was just one story, all of a sudden he was able to launch a podcast delving into the old war stories of the veteran. He was able to then design like a self-published novel that's going to go into the life of this old lady that swore all the time, and then figure out how to link them all together and cross them over to create this energy. But that unlocked the story potential. Whether you're talking about documentary, whether you're talking about a feature film, the story world is going to be essential. And once you have that soapbox in place and the story world in place, I think then you have to start looking for how do I both engage the audience, but also you have to look for revenue potential. I think you have to you understand just as well as I understand, as well as anybody that's in this business understands. If trying to find funding and trying to find revenue is always an interesting game. And I think largely, so I remember just dialing way back, from the very first story world conference that they had in San Francisco, Story World LA. So I was sort of in the mix with all that early stuff, and following, just in the crowd, right? Following Jeff Gomez and Allison Norrington and Henry Jenkins, all those are the early transmedia crowd, which I learned so much from. And just hearing over the next few years, the big question was, how do I monetize this? How do I monetize this? How do I monetize this? And what I looked at is and what I recognized is the projects that they were putting together. They were new media leaning, and they were leaning into technology and into media that didn't have clear business models and didn't have like obvious business models to be able to generate revenue. All of a sudden, this doesn't make sense to investors. It doesn't make sense for brands to jump on if you don't already have an audience. And it was this vicious cycle. And so I'm a big proponent. I feel like a lot of the crowd they feel like they have to make a binary choice, right? So they say, I either can go traditional or I can go new media. Right. Like, which one do I pick? I can either do a movie, or I can either do, VR, AR, MR, any of that stuff. Right. I have to pick. One drives the revenue, but at the same time, it's traditional. One doesn't drive a lot of revenue, but at the same time, it's cooler. And actually what I want to do, I'm a very big proponent of mixing the two. I don't think it has to be a binary choice. I think you can have your cake and you can eat it too. And all of a sudden, I'm very focused on building transmedia business plans that have clearly identifiable revenue generators that are tied synergistically with new media offerings that may not generate revenue, but then generate the engagement that will then feed the revenue generator down the road. And I think that's a strategy that a lot of people haven't put together or didn't put together early in the transmedia days, which then caused them to leave the transmedia space because they think it's just this is like a new media fad. And so figuring out how to make business sense out of it for an investor to look at and say, this makes business sense to me, I'm willing to put money behind it, I think is super, super important. So Soapbox, Story World, then you have to figure out story opportunity some that'll generate revenue, some that can generate engagement, and then put that all together. I think you now have the foundations of a really interesting package to present to people.
And I think it's nowadays, it might be that back in the days of the first Story World conference, etc., that the possibilities weren't all that obvious for the different revenue models that could be obtained for a project. I mean, nowadays, if you look at what some streamers on Twitch make or whatever, sure, there are so many venues of also going past the traditional broadcasters and the traditional media houses, etc., and get direct revenue streams from a lot of different parts that perhaps weren't that readily available a decade ago.
Sure. No, I completely agree. And that's part of the new world opportunities. I look at that early Story World crowd. Like I said, Henry Jenkins, Jeff Gomez, Allison Norrington, Christy Dina. When I say the old crowd, there's the current crowd too. They're still doing amazing work. But I looked at I look at those professionals as, they were hacking through the jungle early on, when there wasn't really a path forward, and they were the explorers jumping in the boat, crossing the ocean, not knowing what they're going to find on the other side. And now for people like me that have the benefit of learning from people like them, I don't necessarily have to hack through the jungle anymore, because now we have tools and we have opportunities that they didn't have at the time, that none of us had at the time. But at the same time, they kind of cleared a way for us to say, okay, this is the philosophy that they work so hard to be able to ingrain. Now with these modern tools and these modern distribution lines, now I can put something together that just makes a lot more sense to investors, right? And I think this helps fix the monetization problem. Mm-hmm. Obviously, as long as you get your, it's a good idea and a good, good creative and things like that. But I think that helps solve a lot of that problem, because, I hear, we've all heard the term starving artists. And I think I'm just 100% convinced that in today's world, with the tools that we readily have available, the democratization of technology, everything that's happened with distribution channels and everything, the internet, that no longer, if we have the right mindset, no longer do artists have to starve. I am 100% an advocate of well-fed artists. And I think that the opportunity is there to create a well-fed artist.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'd like to finally, because as we said, we could talk about this for hours, but
sure.
I'll be happy to get back to you on all of these matters in the future. But one thing that really struck me, and because what happens with someone who is starting to go into these fields or into these opportunities with their project, is that they need to convince other people to either collaborate or to invest or to be a part of the journey in some capacity. And one of the things that you talked about in your Film Courage series was the art of empathetic pitching, which I found resonated quite heavily with me. Could you just explain what you mean by pitching empathetically?
Sure. So empathetic pitching is what I refer to as when you go in and pitch to somebody, you're pitching them on what they care about. And this is something that I hear a lot of pitches. I pitch a lot. And so I sit on both sides of the table quite consistently. And what I find is when people pitch, they pitch to other people like everyone is excited about what they're excited about. And that's not that, and that's rarely the case, right? And so I see this a lot where somebody who is a director or a cinematographer, a DP, they have a really interesting film project that they want to go pitch, and they go to an investor, and they sit in front of an investor, and they have a lookbook, and they run through the lookbook, and they're talking about color palettes and f-stop and lenses and aspect ratios and all the stuff that they love and they get excited about, but it's almost a certainty that the investor on the other side of the table doesn't care anything about that. Not only don't they care, but they don't even know what they're talking about. It's a completely different language, right? And so you have to understand when you have a project you want to pitch, you have to understand to whom you're pitching. And if you're going to go pitch an investor, especially a private equity investor, they're mainly going to be focused and concerned about risk, revenue potential, market opportunity, all that stuff. Now, understanding that, you now have to cater your entire pitch to that. You have to cater your entire pitch to this is how I'm going to generate revenue. This is how I'm going to hedge your investment and diversify the risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you're going to go pitch the same project to a director that you want to attach, all of a sudden, when you go to that director, you're not necessarily going to talk about revenue potential. You're not going to talk about, ancillary revenue. You're not going to talk about hedging the investment risk because the director's not making the investment. And by and large, the investor probably is not going to be a profit participant on the back end. Typically in Hollywood, directors are paid their director fee and they don't participate in the back end. So you can drone on and on about like how much profit you can have in your 10-year plan to a director, but that's not going to move the needle because they're not going to participate in it. If anything, that may make them frustrated and surly that they're not participating in it. So all of a sudden you have to now cater that pitch to what a director cares about. What do directors care about? All of a sudden, directors care about story. They care about look. They care about winning Oscars. They care about, the characters and all the interesting narrative stuff, right? You got to cater that to them. Right. Producers will then have different focuses and different, intents. People at different stages of the career are going to want different stuff. So I'm 100% convinced, and this has proved real in my own career, is that usually with every product and project that you have, you will probably end up, if you do it right, have 10 or 11 or 12 different pitch decks, for the same project, depending on who you're pitching to. I always tell people one of the most, I was a lawyer before I got into entertainment. So I consider myself a recovering lawyer, almost 10 years recovered at this point. But understand, like maybe this is a holdover from my lawyer days, but before I ever go pitch to anybody, I do a tremendous amount of work. This isn't the right phrase, but like cyber stalking people before I pitch to them. I'm sure there's a better investigating, and I guess that's a better word, but the less creepy. But I'll look at their LinkedIn page. I'll find and I'll see where they went to school. I'll go to their IMDb page. If they're in film and television, I'll see what projects they've been a part of, what's in pre-production, what's already been produced, other actors, other people they've worked with. Have I ever worked with those same people? I'll go and find their Instagram page. I'll go to their Twitter profile. If they have a blog, I'll read their blog entries. If they retweet articles, I read the articles they retweet. I'll find interviews with them in the trades of Variety and Deadline and things like that. And it's true, like, especially in an age of social media, people give you tremendous amounts of information about what they want to achieve in their career, what do they want to, what they still want to do that they haven't been able to do, who they like to work with, what they don't like who they don't like to work with. All that information is out there, and all of a sudden I take it and aggregate that information, and I cater that directly into the pitch that I then pitch to them. There was a guy I pitched to several months ago, but he was a lead animator on 17 Pixar movies. Okay. And so he spent his whole career in Pixar, just retired from Pixar, and was out doing some independent projects. We had a project we were putting together, this interesting cryptocurrency project, had an animated piece. I wanted this guy to attach to the animated part of the project. So I lined up a pitch with him. And leading up to that pitch, I was investigating this guy. I was reading interviews with him. I went to his Twitter profile. I did the whole thing. And in a comment on a tweet, he had a tweet that was an old tweet. He had a comment on there was a comment from somebody else who he then responded to that comment and mentioned the reason he retired from Pixar is that he always had a dream of directing a live action movie, and he wanted to try to get out there and direct live action. And this was a reply to a comment on an old tweet. And I've doing my investigation, saw this the day before I went to go pitch to him, and kind of panicked because I was going to go pitch to him this live action or the animated component of this project. And based on that, changed the whole thing. We also had a live action component, and then went to him to pitch to him. And I said in the pitch, I said, listen, I don't want to speak for you, but if I spent 17 years in animation, maybe I would want to try my hand at live action. And, would this be something that you're interested in? I like your eye, your artistic style. We'd love for you to kind of attach to the live action piece. And all of a sudden he's super excited. Yes, it's exactly what I wanted to do. And, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then once he's attached to that, then lended himself to also being able to kind of put his eyeballs on the animated component as well. Oh yeah. But if I hadn't done that research and empathetically positioned that to him and what he wanted to achieve, then all of a sudden, that wouldn't have been successful. And so most artists, for pitches, their pitches are all about them. They're self-focused. This is my project. This is about me. This is about, what I want to do and what I want to achieve. And this is why most pitches, I think, fail in the marketplace. I think if you cater that to figure out how you can bring value to other people and position it that way, empathetically, then what I found is that you're wildly more successful. So all this thing has to be authentic. But presuming it's authentic and presuming that you're not lying to people or being fraudulent, then all of a sudden, when you just position it out of your own space, really catering to other people, then all of a sudden they jump in and in business, what you see in business, like the Silicon Valley model of startup, is that one person can't do it. If you're alone in a rowboat trying to row, down the river, you're probably not going to get that far. You need more people. And it's all about the team, and it's about how do I have a crew in my boat where we can all work together and move this project to where we need to be. And so, but in order to get that crew to attach, you have to position it, in a way that what's in it for them. And that seems self-evident, but it's so rare. I feel like art in general and artists are very self-focused. They're very, they're very arrogant in a way. And listen, I'm an artist myself. So there's an arrogance that comes along with art that creates this preciousness about it. And arrogance sounds pejorative, but it's this, our art and our projects, they're like our kids, right? And so it's very easy to hold it closer than maybe an entrepreneur, a consumer brand entrepreneur that invents the new toothbrush. But at the same time, if we just get outside of ourselves a little bit, figure out how this benefits other people, you're going to find a lot more collaborators, a lot more investors, a lot quicker. But you have to put yourself in the shoes of the other people on the other side of the table.
And I feel that that's a process that will make everything more fulfilling for you as well as the creator, to be able to honestly work with other people and to let them into your process and see how it grows organically into something that perhaps you couldn't have made on your own, basically. Houston, thank you so much for joining me for this podcast episode. I'll be extremely happy to have you on board again in a future episode.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it anytime.
Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.